If this goes on, don't panic. Bringing hope to the world through speculative fiction.
Hello and welcome to episode 28. In this episode, we speak with author, poet, translator, professor, and editor, Kazim Ali. So Diane, how are things going?
It's been a bit of a rough month. We've had a death in the family and, that's been kind of tough. And I was still recovering from April where I exhausted myself, but in part by the move and in part because of the event going on. I'm not going to get into too many details because, hey, I don't figure that our listeners are terribly, concerned. But yeah, it's been kind of hard. How are you doing?
Oh yeah, this has been a rough month for me too, and I'm sorry to hear about your relative. That's never fun.
Thanks. No, it was unexpected and part two. So that's always rough. Yeah, I kind of had a rough month too. Like I had some health issues that I'm not going to get into, which really rocked my existence a little bit there. That really sucked, but everything else has been going pretty good. Well, that's good anyway.
I do have a lot of book reviews coming up. I just want to give some shout outs to some folks here. We, if everyone remembers our episodes with Alan Stroud and Nadia Afifi, I've got both of the second books in their series coming up, so expect some book reviews from them.
Nice.
Also, I've got a cool book from a guy in Pittsburgh. Our listeners probably know I'm from Pittsburgh. It's called Test Drive by Patrick McGinty. And for a while, Pittsburgh was pretty well known for being a testing site for all the stuff that Uber was doing with the self-driving cars. So we would have these cars with these weird camera apparatus attached to the roofs.
Oh yeah.
Driving around and there'd be no one in the driving seat, but there would be someone in the next seat over with this little steering wheel thing so they could stop the car if it went in the wrong direction. It just takes a nice science fiction spin to it, which is pretty cool.
Right.
Very Pittsburgh centric, which, it's the second I heard about that, I was like, yes, I have to review that book immediately. And I also have one called Scarecrow Has a Gun, which is interesting. I kind of got this in the mail randomly. I didn't even know that I signed up for it. Or maybe I didn't. I don't know. But it sounds pretty interesting. It's very Philip K. Dick, not sure what's real and what's wrong. Someone having the main character's having memory problems. And it kind of goes from there. So.
Neat. That sounds pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, it totally does. So everyone look out for those in the book review audio columns coming up in the future. Those should be pretty cool.
Nice.
So, also I wanted to mention to you, I'm finally reading the second book of The Expanse. I know you were reading the Expanse books. I don't know if you've gotten to 2 yet.
I have not gotten to the second book yet, so now you're ahead of me. Just too many things going on, so I haven't quite made it there yet. But
no, I get
cool.
it. Before the episode, you were joking about how I have to be super organized with everything. I also have an extremely extensive, super organized reading list that has multiple tiers depending on if it's something I just want to read, if it's a podcast guest, or if it's a review book, which is utterly ridiculous, and my wife makes fun of me for it. But, you got to do what you got to do, man.
You gotta do what you gotta do, yeah.
But I finally made the second book of Expanse. Pretty good so far. Pretty good. I'm actually, in some aspects of it, I like better than the first one. In some aspects of the first one, I like better than the second one. So, maybe one of these days we'll have to discuss that once you start reading the second one.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Yeah.
Looking forward to that.
All right. So, are we ready for our guest?
We are.
Excellent. All right, so our guest coming up soon is Kazim Ali. We'll be right back. Solarpunk Futures is a podcast about building radically hopeful futures through storytelling and exploration of the solarpunk genre. The podcast features readings of science fiction stories, poetry, and articles published in Solarpunk magazine, as well as interviews with authors, activists, artists, futurists, and others from the Solarpunk community who are envisioning and actively creating a better future. You can find Solarpunk Futures anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also listen directly on our website at solarpunkmagazine.com. And we are back. Our guest today is Kazim Ali. Kazim was born in the United Kingdom and has lived transnationally in the United States, Canada, India, France, and the Middle East, which, by the way, is more places than I've ever visited in my life. His books encompass multiple genres, including volumes of poetry, Inquisition Skyward, winner of the Ohioana Book Award in Poetry, the Far Mosque, winner of the Alice James Books New England/New York Award, The 40th Day, All One's Blue, and the cross-genre texts Bright Felon and Wind Instrument. His novels include the recently published The Secret Room, A String Quartet, and among his books of essays are the hybrid memoir Silver Road, Essays, Maps, and Calligraphies, and Fasting for Ramadan, Notes from a Spiritual Place. He is also an accomplished translator of, and I may get these names wrong, Marguerite Duras, Saurabh Sapari, Ananda Devi, Muhammad Chakralahi. There we go.
Yeah.
Chakralahi. Just too many syllables for me. And others. Kazim is also an editor of several anthologies and books of criticism. After a career in public policy and organizing, which we may also talk about, Ali taught at various colleges and universities, including Oberlin College, Davidson College, St. Mary's College of California, and Naropa University. He is currently a professor of literature at the University of California, San Diego, and his newest books are a volume of 3 long poems entitled The Voice of Sheila Chandra and a memoir of his Canadian childhood, Northern Light. So, welcome, Kazim.
Hey, thank you so much. I feel exhausted listening to you read that biography. I feel tired. I need a break.
Oh, you've written a lot of stuff, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, I've been busy.
No kidding.
That's excellent.
And you need to know that Diane is also Canadian.
So. Oh, that's great. Where are you from?
So, yes. BC. Oh. Yeah, interior BC.
Yeah, I want to go. I want to visit. I mean, I've been to BC, of course, but I would love to go back. I love it. I loved Vancouver when I went there.
Yeah, Vancouver's a lovely city. I definitely recommend that, if you're going to go somewhere out of country, it's a great place to go.
Yeah, I grew up in Manitoba.
Oh, yeah. See, I love Manitoba. Yeah. Right. I drove across Canada at a couple of different points in my life. And I just, everyone always says, oh, everything's so flat out in the prairies. I'm like, okay, first of all, it's not in Manitoba. It's all rolling hills. And secondly, that big sky is so beautiful.
Really beautiful. Yeah.
It's definitely, I just love it. I feel so free having grown up in a valley in the mountains, right? Get out there with the big sky. It's like anything is possible, it feels like.
I know I am personally a huge fan of the mountains. Some people are beach people. I am a mountain person.
I am going to Banff in, I think, November. I'm going to a literary festival that they're having there. Yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's a very well-respected literary festival too, actually. That's great. Good for you. That's awesome.
I'm looking forward to it. I was supposed to go actually and teach at there's like a summer kind of writing thing that happens at the Banff Center.
Yep, that's right.
I was actually hired to go there and teach in the summer of 20, and it got canceled because of everything that happened. And so I'm hoping they'll invite me back at some point. Yeah.
That is awesome. Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
Damn plague messed up everything.
It totally did.
So, Kazim, I mean, you've got so much stuff going on. You've been to so many places. You've written so much stuff. Can you just kind of like give us your origin story? If you were a superhero writer, what's your origin story?
Well, it's great that you asked me that question because I actually have a poem that's called Origin Story.
Oh, perfect.
That's from my book Inquisition. I mean, it just talks about, I want everyone to love for everyone to read that poem, but I also started with that question, where are you from, was also the opening question of my book Northern Light, which is the story of growing up in Manitoba. in the north. I grew up in the north of Manitoba, actually,
Okay.
Diane, like far, far up on the other side of Lake Winnipeg, not all the way to Churchill,
Oh, wow.
but
Okay. Yeah.
more than halfway there, you know. And it was because my father was actually he's still alive, but he's retired now. He was a hydroelectric engineer, and he was worked on one of the big dam projects.
Okay.
The Nelson River, yeah. And so, of course, that dam was built on Indigenous land and
Yes, it was.
had an impact, as most dams in Canada are, actually.
Yes, they are. Yep.
Yeah. And so it's the story of going back to the Indigenous community where the dam was built and discovering what happened and, you know, all the impacts that dam had. So that is recounted in my book, Northern Light.
Wow.
Which has just came out last year. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. I will definitely have to check that out.
Yeah. Yeah. Kind of, unexpected. It's not normally I think now there's greater consciousness about it. But when I was growing up, we did not think about Indigenous people. We just, we were there. We were Canadians. We were immigrants, but we were immigrants to Canada, and we did not think about who was on the land before we got there.
Yeah, it's true. It's been a real blind spot in our history and a political and moral shame on our country. I think that we're moving in the right direction now. Things are starting to get better, but there's still a long way to go. You're so right.
I agree. And I think I agree with you that we're trying. I mean, at least there's a conversation is happening now, so that's important to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's better than what we're doing over here in the U.S. That's all I can say. We're like just in the downward spiral of doom. I feel like
that is definitely true. That there is, we're farther behind on this side of the border.
Yeah, absolutely. So did you move so much because of your father's job?
Yes and no. I mean, I think we were what one now calls economic migrants. I mean, we were following work,
Yeah.
The political situation in India and Pakistan was not great at the time that my parents first moved to London, but they came to Canada from London, I think partially in response to the racism of English society at the time, but also because the government of Canada in the 70s was making it really easy for people to move because they wanted to attract the best and the brightest, so to speak,
Mm-hmm.
So my parents and many other people from, the former Commonwealth countries came to Canada, and why did I keep moving around after that? I don't know. I guess like living in 3 countries, 4, I guess, if you count the United States, by the time I was 10 years old, maybe it just instilled in me a sense of the wanderer. And so I continued to wander, and I have spent stints in France and stints in the Middle East and in India in my adult life. And I've lived all over the United States too, in various different places: California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, DC, New York.
Wow.
Yeah, I've just lived around. And I travel a lot for my work. So I think, and I enjoy it a little.
Yeah.
I enjoy air travel less now than I used to in the beginning. It felt more fun. Now it's a little bit of a chore, but I like going to new places and I like meeting new people.
That's awesome. So obviously you've been influenced by a lot of different cultures. This is a 2-part question here for you. Number 1, can you talk a little bit about the cultural influence of all these places on your writing? And then more specifically on your choose your own adventure novel, Citidal of Whispers.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, in any good fantasy story, it's like wandering around as part of the story.
Right.
I mean, rare is the fantasy novel that just takes place in one place and things happen to you there. It's almost built in that you have to leave home and wander and discover new things and, gather your allies. And, those are like the stock aspects of any fantasy story. So, of course, this story, as many fantasy stories do, started with a map. And it was a map. My friends in high school and I used to play this game where we would all pretend we were from different countries. And my role in the game was we were all in Model UN together. This is the very first time I'm telling this story, by the way.
Nice.
We were all in Model UN together. And so we had this game where we pretended we were from these different countries, and it was a fantasy milieu. And my role was I was a part of the diplomats that kind of kept the peace in this world. And I drew a map to represent the world that we were playing in, and I labeled all the different, countries that the different people had. And so that was actually the very beginning. I mean, fast forward, 30 years or however long it's been since high school. I hardly want to admit to it. 32 years.
I hear you.
Yeah. And I was working on this, in Choose Your Own Adventure, people invited me to write a fantasy, a YA fantasy, a plus size, right? This is larger than the regular Choose Your Own Adventure books. It's like 300 pages or so. So I'm more than twice as long as the normal books that they do. And it was going to be an epic. And I took I remembered that map. I didn't draw the same map, but I drew a new map. And of course, the map that's in the book, an artist, looked at my map and redrew it to recreate it. But it was really, really fun to kind of create all of the different cultures and write all of the different, characters that came from the countryside, came from the city. And the characters in the book, of course, they have to travel by boat. And sea travel is really treacherous in this world. You have to have charts because there are these currents that rush through the ocean. And if you cross one in the wrong way, your boat is destroyed. So I wanted to make it, I didn't want to make it that easy to get around, And so we actually have 3 moons in the sky. And my concept, although it's never quite explained in the first book, it is going to be a plot point of the second book. But my concept is that because there's multiple moons in the sky, they have various different types of gravitational pressure, tidal pressure on the waters of this world. And so water on this world acts unpredictably in ways. Like I said, that's not much of a plot point in the first, this volume, Citadel of Whispers, but it is going to enter into the second book a little bit more.
Yeah, I know. I remember that part when, well, you know how it is with Choose Your Own Adventures. There's
different parts. You might not have gotten to it.
Right. But no, I mean, one part that I read talked about that kind of briefly. They kind of described it in the boat captain had to be very knowledgeable in order to get from one side to the other, right?
Right, and she's an aristocrat. She's a former aristocrat. She's run away from her kingdom, she's a duchess, and she's run away from the duchy. And as it happens, it's that she's stolen her husband's charts. That's why she got away. And she stole his ship too.
Nice.
Yeah, I really wanted to write different kinds of characters. The fantasy story is fun because there are certain stock characters that you recognize in them, right? Like there's the old wise person, and sometimes that person can command magic or has mystical powers. And then there's usually this sort of roguish, kind of scoundrel character. And, I wanted to put a spin on it. So in my story, the ship's captain, the kind of scoundrel rogue character, is an older woman. She's probably in her late 50s or early 60s, even the way she's described. But she fights and she curses and she smokes a pipe. She's got a hip flask in her jacket.
My spirit animal. Yes.
Every now and then it takes a swig. Yeah.
I am 47. I am this woman. I'm telling you.
When we were talking about it in the kind of like in the marketing meetings at Choose Your Own Adventure, I said I really wanted to see like older women cosplaying as the Duchess.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And there was an artist who is the original cover had pictures of all the characters on it, like how you sometimes have in those fantasy books. And it's the cover now is a picture of the actual Citadel of Whispers, which I love just as much. But I do remember when the artist was submitting these, drawings of the characters, the one point that the real what was really important to me was the main character of the book. So in Choose Your Own Adventure books, the classical Choose Your Own Adventure books, the protagonist is usually written gender neutral in a way so that boys or girls or non-binary children, although probably back in the 70s, we wouldn't have had that language to describe them as such. But the point was any kind of child ought to have been able to pick up a Choose Your Own Adventure book, which are all written in the second person, right? So they're all say like, you go down the hallway and open the door, so that they imagine themselves inside the story, right? And so they were written in a very gender neutral way without gender markers. So it was never commented that the protagonist is wearing a skirt or pants or has short hair or long hair. It was meant to be just in the own child's imagination, inclusive in that way, right? And what happened was the marketing staff of the company, I can't remember if it was Scholastic or whoever it was that published them, those people drew the pictures. And so that's why you see on the cover of those old books, like, you know, Who Killed Harlow Thrombey, or like, you know, whatever those, you remember all those books, right? Your code name is Jonah, you know, they would have, it would be a boy or a girl on there because the artists were drawing them. And they were mostly doing boys because it was felt that a girl would buy a book that had a boy protagonist, but a boy might not buy a book that had a girl protagonist, right? Was the whole concept behind like Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. I mean, the adventures are pretty much the same. It's just that they thought, oh, you're going to identify more with this gender. So the whole thing was, even though the heart of the book had this gender neutrality to it, they were still positioned in certain ways. And so I actually want to play with that idea about my character being written as gender neutral. But then I thought, what if the character is truly written as if it was a gender non-binary character? And so I proceeded from that. There's nothing in the book that says that. And the main character never speaks and says, you know, whatever, I'm this gender or that gender. But I wrote from that concept and I presented it from that way. And I gave them a gender neutral name as well. So it really sort of allowed me, with the main character whose name is Krishy, and with the character of the Duchess, and with other characters in the book as well, I was really able to kind of explore those typical, like kind of not stereotypes, but like fantasy archetypes, explore them, yet try to find freshness in them and put spins on them.
I think you did an excellent job with it, you know. There's so much that you said there that I want to touch on that I'm kind of like trying to decide in my head what direction I want to go with.
Well, like, let me give you another example. I mean, in these fantasy stories, there's normally each character is good at one thing that they excel at. So there might be one character who's like the best at fighting, or there might be one character who's the smartest, but they're really bad at fighting. You know, like they kind of get, you know, the kids in these stories kind of get slotted in different directions. And I was more interested in kids who could do different things and maybe even unexpected things. So in this book, you know, there's a joke about Star Wars, that the Star Wars movies, that like shot for shot, Princess Leia is a better shot than anyone in the movie. You know,
right.
Some Star Wars devotee counted all the shots and discovered that she hit the greater percentage of the time. And so I like that kind of thing where it's like, you don't expect that, you know? And so in this book, there's a character named Saeed. If you've read the book, he's really small and he's always cracking jokes, and he's like a little bit of a scaredy cat, you know? And yet he's the one who mostly wins fights. Whenever he's in a fight, he normally wins it. And it's the kind of thing like you might not notice that, you know?
Yeah.
So I like to kind of subvert expectations in that way.
We're talking a lot about developing characters here. I imagine that's probably pretty challenging in a choose your own adventure kind of situation where it's like you have no idea what direction or directions the reader is going to read into, right? Yeah. I mean, I think I ended up with like, I went through 12, 13, 14 endings, something like that, you know. Yeah. Some ended very early, some ended, you know, way further on into the book, you know. How do you develop a character in that kind of situation?
I mean, it's kind of hard, but I sort of relied on the old structure of the television sitcom that kind of has the character is the character, and then they just get put into all these different situations. And they might evolve in small ways, but they're mostly stay true to this sort of essential behavior. And they'll develop through the books itself. Like right now, I envision 3 books, a trilogy. And so there might be some evolution book by book, but within the story itself, it's the same character throughout. And I also proceeded from this kind of concept that any quote unquote anything that could happen would happen, meaning most readers will do a multiple read through, like as you did.
Right.
And in fact, over the life of a book, most readers are going to get to every single ending. So I didn't get too caught up on, well, what if they miss this happening to Zara? Or what if they miss this happening to Arjun? And I thought they will eventually get to all of it. They'll eventually see Saeed being brave. They'll eventually see, Zara fail at something. They'll see Arjun act, honorably. They'll see him act dishonorably. Like they'll see all of the different facets of a person. And I think that's what a real human is. I mean, a character in a book can be noble or craven or selfish or saintly, but a person, you or me, or any, Alan, Diane, Kazim, all 3 of us, we're all of those things. On any given day, we might be all of them at once, or we might go through periods in our lives where, wow, yeah, that was a really bad moment. I did not behave like that was not my best self. We say that, right? Or I treated that person really badly. Or, wow, I really came through for that person. Or I'm a great parent or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like we all have all of that in us. And so Choose Your Own Adventure is sort of, it's kind of a reflection of life, In life, you don't always get to go back and choose another path, but sometimes you do. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you do get to start over with a person or try something different, or make a mistake and make up for it. So I liked like a broader understanding of character that I didn't have to sort of stress out the minutia of, oh, they're not going to understand this because they haven't read this particular ending, Yeah.
Right. Would you say that's comparable to how you wrote the plot? Because again, the plot, you don't know who's going to read what, unless you just assume everybody's going to read everything. So, how did you continue to develop the plot and keep the plot moving forward? Yeah. And the second question, how did you keep track of it all?
Oh my God. Well, first of all, it was super fun to kind of plot out what was going to happen to everybody. And I started out with a flow chart and I wrote it on a big piece of poster paper. And I mapped out the story. It's not to say I didn't begin to improvise or change things. And in fact, I think there were 2 or 3 different iterations of the poster board because I kept redesigning it in a certain way. And then eventually the Choose Your Own Adventure people created a template for me to do a text-based outline of my diagram. So I numbered all of the squares, and then I was able to create it in a Word document. And then I really started writing the book and filling in the paragraphs. So it'd say like, there'd be a sentence that said, Krishy runs down the hall to confront blah, blah. And I knew what was going to happen there because there was like a little paragraph of description of what the plot was. And then I would write the actual section. So there was a lot of plotting and preparation first. And then the writing of it was, happened kind of quickly. But once I started to get the full shape of what the plot was, I started to become interested in things like time markers, where maybe an hour into a story, like a bell would ring in one storyline, and in another storyline, you might hear the bell at that point, although you might not know what it is. And I wanted to have some level of consistency where, for example, in one part of the book, they're sneaking through a mansion trying to find some secret documents to prove that, the Baroness is corrupt or something like that. And the guards go into a certain part of the house. So it's not as if, like, if you go into that part of the house where the guards are going, you get caught. But if you go into the other part of the house, you do not get caught because they aren't there. Do you see what I mean? It's not as if I wasn't inconsistent in a way where it's like, oh, suddenly the guards are going to be here. Because no, in the other storyline, they were there. So they're not going to be in this part of the house. And I liked that kind of, that's not normally how most choose your own adventure books work. They just sort of, they have their own logics that they use. But I kind of wanted something like that to show that there was a sort of inner overarching thing happening. And so for the second book, it's actually going to take place so they wandered around a lot in the first book. I want the second book to be fixed in place. I want most of it to happen in one specific place. And then based on the choices that you make, it takes you into different parts. So part of it, one branch takes place in the castle, and you're only in the castle. And I have a map of the castle, and based where you go, you're going to go in different directions. And you'll end up meeting different people in different places. In whatever storyline you're in, they'll be located where they're located, if that makes sense. So it's going to feel more like it's on a game board.
Yeah. You kind of have to have a picture in your head of what's going on at what time, all the time. Exactly. And then you kind of construct your story around that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Diane, as a writer, any thoughts on plot or character here?
No, just like common experiences, right? Like, I know quite a few people who do like role-playing game one-shot adventures and, things like that, or choose your own adventure style situations. A lot of them plot with Post-it notes, right? This is how these pieces fit together until things come out in this way. Right. I also can speak from experience now with the way we do Game of Tomes, right? It's, there's an ongoing storyline and it is dependent upon the results of the game, right? So everybody contributes to the plot and the outcome just by playing it. So you kind of have to write on the fly, right? You have to have alternate ideas for what will happen if this works out and what will happen if it doesn't work out. So it's like, in a way, it's kind of like writing 2 or 3, 3 or 4 different plots at the same time, right? And then trying to puzzle piece them back together. And I think that's a lot of fun.
I loved it. I had so much fun creating the story and thinking about what was going to happen to them. And, I've read a lot of, there are people who read a lot more fantasy than I have, but I loved reading, Lord of the Rings, of course, and David Eddings and Terry Brooks. And I just loved all those stories. And I also read Piers Anthony, which is like a more lighthearted take on fantasy. I don't know if you remember those books. And we played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. And I played all different kinds of, TSR at that time had various different types of role-playing games. And me and my cousins, we played all of them. There was one that was set in the Old West.
Yep.
Called Boot Hill.
I remember Boot Hill.
But the problem with Boot Hill is not much about it was fun, except for the mechanics for barroom brawls. Those were really good.
Yes, you're right.
We would play these games, and they'd always end up in a barroom brawl because that was just.
I was about to say, you just play barroom brawls over and over again, right?
Totally. But we played.
That's what everybody did. Yes.
Like science fiction one, and there was Gangbusters, which was set in Prohibition time, and there was Top Secret, which was like spies, like James Bond. So we played everything. So I really wanted to kind of mix it up, and I liked the Joss Whedon shows where you'd have like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which was horror, but also high school drama, or Angel, which was like vampires, but also like noir detective story, or his show Firefly, which I thought was great. I know Joss Whedon himself is, problematic figure, but the shows were good. And he did Firefly, which was like science fiction, but a Western. Do you know what I mean? So I liked that kind of spin, and I wanted to, I had fun in Citidal of Whispers kind of mixing up genres and making it feel like contemporary with, I also thought, okay, I've got these like 11, 12, 13-year-old protagonists. I want them to sound like kids. I don't want them to be little grown-ups, Right. But I also wanted them to be capable. I didn't want them to be dumb. Like my main criticism of I don't know if it's criticism or not, but with Harry Potter, they're kids, but they don't really have full agency, you know? Whereas in the real world, you have people like Greta Thunberg or these different, you know, young children, the kids from Parkland School who are working on trying to prevent gun violence, or you have, you know, the Ohed Tamimi, the Palestinian girl who's 14 years old, and she was the one who confronted the soldier and got arrested, you know. So you have these kids who are, you know, 13, 14 years old, but who are doing these incredibly courageous things.
Yes.
And are conscious of what they're doing. You know, the kids who were working on Parkland, that Parkland activist, they were, the younger ones of them were 14 years old. Lauren Hogg was 14 years old when she started working on all this stuff. So I thought, I don't want to have a 14-year-old kid not understanding exactly what it is they're doing and not understanding exactly how powerful they are. Yeah. So that was really important to me in the writing of the protagonists.
That's excellent. I think when you've got something with that kind of free-flowing format too, it's important not to take yourself too seriously, right? Like, the reason why Joss Whedon's stuff works is because sometimes it's completely ridiculous. Like, it's consistent with this world building. It makes sense, but it's so out there that you just can't help but laugh. And then in the next episode, you can have heartbreaking drama that just makes you cry all over the place. Right. Yeah. And that is a key, I think, to writing a fluid sort of, you know, shifting plot, right? That you can change those emotional resonances depending on what's going on. So that's really cool. That's really cool if you can do that. And, you know, if that's your inspiration, then sounds like my stick. Sounds like something I'd love.
I have a world building question for you as well. So,
all right.
First of all, why fantasy and not science fiction? It seems like you've just leaned fantasy all your life. Is that accurate?
Why fantasy and not science fiction? So I love some of the traditional elements of fantasy. I like the old timey, you know, non-tech kind of medieval-ish sort of era. I like the mysticism and the magic. Probably my very favorite fantasy series, which I didn't even mention before, is actually science fiction, which is, of course, The Dragon Riders of Pern. Right. And people often think of it as fantasy because dragons.
Yeah. But it's all science fiction. And they usually put it in the fantasy section too, right? Because
yes, they do.
They go, oh, it's got a dragon on the cover. Yeah.
Even Anne McCaffrey herself said, I've always thought about it as a science fiction story because it's actually reverse science fiction because it's about what happens when an advanced society loses its technology. Yeah. And the full narrative of arc of the not the new, I mean, now there's all kinds of new ones, but the full narrative arc of Anne McCaffrey's novels was this pathway to rediscovering the tech. I mean, the very first advanced tech shows up in the second book. It shows up in Dragon Quest, which was the very second book of the series. So it's like from the get-go, you know, this series is going to be about these people like rediscovering, you know, the lost technology. And then sure enough, I think the culminating book of her run was All the Wares of Pern, which they literally, spoiler alert, they literally go back into space in spacesuits at the end of that book. Although there was another book after it called The Skies of Pern that Anne McCaffrey did, but it's a little bit like an epilogue. It doesn't really feel like, I'm not sure why she wrote it. I think she should have left it with the previous book, in my opinion. Yeah. So anyways, when I was doing Citidal of Whispers, as I was writing it, I was thinking like, wow, it would be fun to do a science fiction as well. But if I do a science fiction one in the future, and I hope I get a chance to, I don't think I'll do it as an epic series. Something about the fantasy story made me want to tell a whole arc. But if I were to do science fiction, I think I might just do a one shot, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, I feel like that whole, it's fantasy, you know, there kind of almost has to be a trilogy or at least a duology, you know. again, like you were saying earlier, it's just kind of built into the genre,
It is, you know, and you always have that book 1, book 2, book 3, like that kind of structure, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, The Return of the Jedi, you know.
Yeah.
You could probably take those 3 titles and put them onto any book 1, book 2, and book 3 of any fantasy series, and you can see the arc, you know. You win a little bit, you lose a lot, and then you make a comeback.
Yeah.
It's kind of, you know, it's a sturdy structure.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's magic in it, of course. It's a fantasy world. And I don't know if you've kept up with fantasy these days, if you read a lot of newer fantasy, but there's kind of like separate philosophies on how magic should be written now. There is one side that I would say is very like Tolkien-esque in that, you know, Gandalf kind of just does stuff and that's all you need to know. And it's never explained and that's just the way life is, right? Then there's the other side, which is kind of more like the Brandon Sanderson side, which is where you have these complex magic systems where it's almost like hard science fiction, but for fantasy magic, right?
Well, I mean, since I'm a gamer, I like the second of those options a little better. I like that idea, you know, like with Dungeons and Dragons, it's like you actually have a finite number of spells that you can use per day. And there's different ways that you can use them. You know, I kind of like that. It makes it a little more fun. On the other hand, there is an in-between, I think, like for example, the bending from Avatar, it's somewhat in between. Like there's disciplines and techniques that are fixed and real and you work within them in certain ways. And so sure, Aang can like make a tidal wave, or Katara or whoever can make a tidal wave, but there's still like, it'll take a lot of energy out of them and they'll be tired after, or they kind of have to learn how to do it.
Magic with limitations. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. And I think like much later in the series when Katara learns, oh, you can actually bend water that's inside plants, or eventually she learns how to bend people's blood, you know? So it's advanced, but it advanced within the broader structure. And that's what I do in the Citidal of Whispers. Their magic, quote unquote, is they're like mental disciplines. So they can kind of read minds. They can influence people with suggestions. At some point, I'm going to, you know, do some things with like invisibility where they're not actually invisible, but they're like suggesting to people that they can't see them. Do you know what I mean?
Cool.
And I do want to kind of explore concepts of physics, like deep quantum physics in terms of, you know, could a person fly? Well, maybe if they understood the relationship between molecules, or could you pass through matter, or could you turn back time and move into a different time? Like all of that stuff is sort of explored at the quantum level in physics, which I enjoy reading about. Not the heavy math stuff, but I like to read those, I don't know what you call them, like popular physics books. You know, Carlo Rovelli, Alan Lightman. There's a bunch of, I forget the guy who writes about string theory. Brian Greene, maybe is his name. So I read those kind of books and I think like, and then the other thing is the powers that come from the yogic scripts. And I want to explore some of those too. So there's one yogic power where a person can actually stop their own heart and appear as if they're dead. And so I want to use that as a plot point in one of the later books where someone is going to be under attack and then everyone's going to think they're dead, but really they had stopped their heart.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
I gotta be honest, I did not expect you to say that. Great answer.
You have to read those old yoga texts. They are like science fiction themselves.
Huh. Yep. That's neat. That's definitely neat. Yeah. I'm gonna shift gears here a little bit. Is everybody okay with that?
Sure.
Yeah.
So you, Kazim, have written so many different things and you've done a lot of stuff, it looks like, in your life. I used to write a lot of poetry myself, and I published a bit when I was in college and slightly post-college and slightly pre-college. And then I kind of just like burned out, you know, and like moved on with my life and did other stuff. But my question for you as a poet, you know, how is for you writing poetry a different process than writing a novel or something more prose like?
Well, I mean, it's harder to do prose because it's, it takes a lot longer. But in another way, it's easier because you can kind of just get started. With poetry, I feel like, I'm sure other people would say something different. But for me, I feel like I need some level of inspiration, some kind of spark of an idea to get me going. Whereas with a prose project, once you know what something is about, you can kind of just, push forward and get it done. You can get it accomplished. You can do like, I'm going to do 100 pages. I'm going to do 100 words a day, or, 500 words a day or something like that, and kind of progress on your project. With poetry, it's not at all like that, at least not for me. And I know there are some people who do, I'm going to write a page of poetry a day, or I'm going to do a poem a day for 30 days. I have no idea how that works. I could never do that. And so I kind of work a little more slowly and at inspiration with poetry, but it's also, I have to say, a rapture for me. I mean, it makes me so happy. I don't think there's anything in the world I could love more, excluding people, of course, but like, I don't think there's any activity that I could love more than, sitting in an afternoon and reading, drinking something tasty, like, a coffee or a, really, really nice drink, and have a notebook open beside me and just writing, it's just, it's just so great. You don't always know what's going to come out at the end. But it's just such a pleasure,
Cool. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I used to be the same when I wrote a lot, and I always wrote very slowly. I would have a spark of an idea, and then I'd kind of write it out mostly all at once. And then I would kind of play with it and edit it over like a couple weeks usually, and then usually be done, and that would be the final thing.
It does take time.
It does. And I was not very prolific. I'd write something every couple months, basically. Something worth sending out for publication anyway.
That's how I am too with poetry. It takes time.
Yeah, for sure. So you've also done some other things, like, for example, you were an organizer for a bit. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I worked for the United States Student Association, which was a national student organization founded in 1947, I believe, as a way of connecting students from around the country. And I worked, supporting students in higher education, working on Capitol Hill to get increased funding for higher education and student financial aid. And I also worked for a couple years in Albany for an organization called the Student Association of the State University, which was an organization representing SUNY students. And we worked in coalition with a similar organization down in New York City that represented the interests of CUNY, City University of New York students. And it was the same. We were trying to make sure tuition stayed low in the public system, make sure that education, higher education in particular, was accessible, affordable and accessible to all New Yorkers. And it was really important work. And I think it kind of led me to where I am now, where I am chairing my department. I'm chairing the Department of Literature at UC San Diego and working really hard to bring in really new and exciting scholars and making sure that the study of literature at UCSD stays, cutting edge and engaged with the contemporary. I'm really excited about doing that kind of work, although it is a 3-year term and I'm at the end of my first year. So I have 2 more years and then I will go back to teaching full time. And I'm really looking forward to that also, because I do miss teaching.
Very cool. Very cool. We, part of our mission in this podcast is to kind of push back against the powers that be and things that we think are wrong, with our society and our governments and that sort of thing. Can you give any advice to our listeners who are thinking about getting involved in volunteering or getting a little more involved with the political process?
Well, I think it's important to connect with the groups that exist. You don't have to, reinvent the wheel, but find the organizations that are working on the issues that you care about. And there are so many different ways of reaching out now. You can connect with people really easily. And there's a lot of different ways to be involved as an activist. You don't have to be out in the streets with a bullhorn necessarily, although that is also happening. But there are ways of writing, participating in campaigns to pressure your elected officials to take action on different kinds of legislation, and getting involved in elections to elect the people that share your political ideals, to support candidates who, are supporting your own issues. So there are so many different ways to get involved, I think. And I really personally hope that young people really take the call to action seriously, and older people too, that we all kind of, take responsibility for the condition of our world. It came to this point because we made this world like this through action or inaction. We did it, and we can change it as well.
Awesome. Thanks for that. Diane, before I move on, do you have any burning questions that you want to ask? Because I feel like you haven't had a chance to ask a lot yet.
Maybe why did you choose to get involved in the organizations that you did? Like, what is something like what motivated you for that specific?
Well, I was a SUNY student myself at the State University of New York of Albany. So it was kind of self-interest at the beginning, but I also felt that access to higher education was such an important issue. To make sure that people, regardless of economic status, were able to achieve higher education, and to make sure that people of color and women and LGBTQ people and people with disabilities would not have bars to their successful completion of their educations. So we worked on things like safety on campus. We worked on things like combating issues of racism, promoting affirmative action in admissions. We worked on accessibility on campus, physical accessibility on campus, and in other ways as well. All of these issues were so important to us because it wasn't just whether tuition should be affordable or not. That was the main thing. But there were all these other ways that would prevent people from really kind of achieving their full educational goals. So I feel like that was really important work that I did. I did that for 4 years. And then I went back to graduate school myself. And then that's when I started teaching after that.
Awesome.
So we're getting pretty close to the end here. But before we finish up, you've written, over 20 books as far as I could count. Could you tell our audience about a couple that they might like?
Oh, what to start with? A book of mine to start with. Is that what you want to ask?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I wrote a book called Silver Road. I published it just a couple of years ago, and its subtitle is Essays, Maps, and Calligraphies. It consists of essays, kind of lyric prose sections, pages from my diary, and also includes poetry. So I feel like that's probably, and it's short. It's only about 100 pages long. So that might be a good one to start with. And then I'm really proud of this book that I published. You mentioned it. It's called The Secret Room, a string quartet. It's a novel about these 4 characters, but each character is associated with one musical instrument from a traditional string quartet, and it's written in the structure of a string quartet. So I love that book too. It's close to my heart. Very
interesting. Neat. So all of our listeners that like that experimental kind of style, go and check that one out.
Yeah, and if you like music, you'll like it. If you like classical music, you'll like that book.
Nice. Excellent. All right. So we've got a couple questions that we ask everybody at the end. The first one is, what is giving you hope right now?
What is giving me hope? Young people give me hope always because, they have energy, they have vision, they have joy, they still have a whole world in front of them. And so they give me hope, and I want to help them achieve their ambitions too.
Awesome. Thanks for that. And then the final question is, where can our audience find you in your books? And what are you working on next as well?
Wow. Well, what am I working on next is I'm trying to work on a book about yoga. I taught yoga for a bunch of years off and on. I would travel and go back at a yoga studio in the West Bank territory, Palestinian territory of the West Bank. And So I'm writing about that, and I'm also working on some new poems. We'll see. I don't know when that's going to come out. I'm going to try to work on the second book in the series of the Citidal of Whispers. I haven't started that yet. Hoping to do that soon. And also, I'm just looking forward to the summer. Looking forward to spending some time at the beach and with my family. Yeah. Oh, and where can you find my books? My website is www.kazimali.com. That's all the info's there.
Awesome. Excellent. So thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that was our interview with Kazim Ali. Diane, so what did you think?
Oh, he's cool. Yeah, he's obviously a Renaissance man, does a variety of different things, and clearly suffers from as much ADD as I do, so that's always fun too.
I picked up on that too, and that's so funny that you say that.
Well, that's ADD people, right?
Yeah.
Two things. We have two superpowers, right? One is that we can do a lot of different things, and that can be really useful when we have the energy to do that. The other superpower is that when we need to concentrate on something, we can hyper-focus. I have harnessed this power. It is the only way I get anything done in my life. Clearly, Kazim is the same.
That is hilarious. Yes. I think I mostly just have the distracted part. The hyper-focus, if I get hyper-focused, it is intense and bad. I'm mostly just distracted all the time, like, what?
Yeah, we're not going to talk about behind the scenes with the podcast and the hyper-focus that goes on there. No, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to bite our tongue. Yes, we are.
Yes. Shh. That does not happen. That does not happen. I wish I had the hyper-focus at work. I absolutely do not. I'm like, have you ever seen The Big Lebowski?
Yes.
Do you know that scene where the cop is talking to him and Lebowski's like, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention. And he throws the cop at him.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
like me all the time.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I wasn't paying attention.
Hey, that's perfectly normal ADD. Work is boring. See?
Oh my God.
Concentrating on the stuff you find interesting is easy. Concentrating on the stuff you find boring is damn near impossible.
Yes. Oh my God. But yeah, I mean, I just can't believe the output Kazim has.
I know, right? He has done a lot and a lot of different things in a lot of different areas.
It's kind of amazing.
I can't help but have a little bit of respect. Like, he comes from a gamer background and he writes choose your own adventures, right? But at the same time, he's clearly respected in the literary community, because that Banff Literary Festival that he was talking about is like, that's some pretty intense literary culture here in Canada. They would not tolerate the likes of me, So I'm like, oh, really? And they were inviting you to come teach? Yeah. Holy crap! Okay, right. So I'm seriously impressed. That's pretty awesome. And somehow he manages to balance the two. I might have to, pick his brain and find the secrets there.
Yeah. I honestly, when I first thought about inviting him on, I was kind of sitting around, and I got sent his book as just like a review book. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I'm like, oh, this is cool. I haven't read a Choose Your Own Adventure since I was a kid, and I used to love them. And my kids are starting to get into them. So I'm like, okay, I kind of have to just review this because it's cool, right? And then I was like, I might actually want to bring this guy on. And then I looked him up online, and I was like, oh man, I don't know if he'd even bother to come on our show.
Yeah, that's right. Because he's a serious writer, quote unquote. Yeah. Except he's not, obviously. So there you go.
Yeah, and that was so cool. And to hear about his gaming background, to me, was I kind of thought like, he was like gonna be this serious writer, like you're saying, who just happened to have read like some Choose Your Own Adventures when he was a kid and enjoyed them. You know what I mean?
Right.
I did not expect the whole gamer background, the whole like fantasy background stuff. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. So I guess it goes to show you never really know, right?
You don't. And I gotta say, I am continually surprised as I contact people and invite them on, who writes back to me and is excited and interesting, and who writes back to me and is just like, no. It's not always who you think it would be.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it comes down to that, try not to take yourself too seriously,
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's wrap this thing up. Everybody out there, please, if you like what we're doing, share us with your friends on Facebook or Twitter, or, if you talk to people in real life anymore, tell them, hey, there's this really cool podcast. You should check it out. They're pretty awesome. Feel free to rate or review. No pressure. Everything that I hear, it doesn't actually help the podcast at all. But, someone might read the review or see the rating and say, hey, that's pretty cool. So, if you've got the time and the willpower, go ahead and do that.
And don't forget, we have a Patreon if you would like to support us directly.
Yes. And that is at patreon.com/ifthisgoeson. And we've got a bunch of tiers there. I do some 5-minute book reviews every now and then, which I owe one, and I've been kind of putting it off, but I need to do that. We have a Discord. We've got discounts to the Rambo School for Wayward Writers.
Which you should join for just for that. Honestly, you should.
Honestly, Kat's school is amazing. And
it's epic.
It is epic. And I have taken courses there, and I have written a course for Kat. And the people there are just phenomenal. I mean, she gets some of the best writers in science fiction at her school. And that's not an exaggeration at all.
Facts.
Total facts.
Yep.
One of my favorite things to do with the Patreon is to have our patrons vote on a guest, and it's never the person I think is going to be, and it's always fun to try and invite them on and see who will come on.
Yeah.
That's always a fun ride.
Yeah, I like that too. I like that kind of direct feedback.
Yes.
So join for that, if nothing else, guys, because then you can tell us who you're interested in us talking to, right?
Yeah. And our last big interview, Matt Kressel, was one of those people. So.
And he was great. He was a lot of fun.
He is great. I love Matt. I've interviewed him a ton of times, and he's just awesome every time. Great guy. Seriously.
Yeah.
You can also support us on Ko-fi, and that's Kofi. They have a little search thing up in the corner. You can just type in "if this goes on," and we will pop right up. And you can contribute just like $5 there, $5 one time, or $2 or 50 cents. Honestly, anything helps.
Yep, helps us to pay for all that background infrastructure that you guys don't see.
That's right. Exactly. And, it's not, I'm not losing my house over it, but it is also not cheap. So anything you can do would be appreciated.
And thanks.
And that's it. So thanks everybody for listening. I appreciate it.
Yeah. See you next time, guys.
If This Goes On, Don't Panic is edited by Alan Bailey with production by Jasmine Gielink. Our theme music is by Father Flamethrower. Additional music is by Christopher Snydrowski, and outro music by Sable Aradia. Intro by Dave Robinson. A special thanks to our guest, Kazim Ali. Thanks for supporting us, and we'll see you again soon.